All right, so we are recording. So to introduce our speakers, we have Marie Curry here from Community Legal Aid. This is an issue of interest to that group in general. I know that I've been working with her on a couple different things, and she actually helped me with a project recently, is how I met her. And then John is also here from Community Legal Aid. So he's going to be speaking about eviction specifically. And then our final speaker is going to be Drew Reilly, and he is with, well, a couple of different things. He's an attorney with the Land Bank and previously with the Muni Court. So we're going to start with Marie, and she is going to share her presentation. So we'll talk about screen sharing.
Okay, give me 1 second to share my screen. All right, if I can just get a thumbs up that I'm doing that right and you've got what you're supposed to have. Okay, and now I have to get the right screen back up for me. All right, now just so you know, I can't see your faces, so if somebody needs to signal something to me, you're going to have to just tell me, okay? All right. Hi, everyone. I want to thank you, Akron DSA, for inviting me to be part of the panel this evening. I'm going to help frame our conversation. So I'm going to talk about two particular questions. The first question is housing a human right? And the second question is, why is housing justice racial justice? So the first thing I want to do is take a minute to introduce myself. I think it's important for you to know something about my background, so you know where my perspective comes from. Not my life story, I promise, just 60 seconds. So you know my name is Marie Curry. I grew up in, let's see if I can make this work. I grew up in upstate New York. I've lived in Boston, Washington, D.C., and San Francisco, and I've been in Akron since 1998. That's over 20 years. I don't know how many of you grew up in Summit County? Hands raised. And who grew up outside Ohio? So it's really, it's different coming here from somewhere else. Professionally, I graduated from law school in 1989. I practiced law in Prince George's County in Baltimore, Maryland, and in the Bay Area in California. And then the love of my life brought me here, as I said, in 1998. And after 13 of what I call the blur years, I returned to school to study public health. Really health policy in particular, and I earned a master's in public health in 2011, and I've been at Legal Aid full-time since the fall of 2011. I don't practice law very much. My work is policy work, it's health policy work, which it turns out is everything. So the first question we're going to look at is housing a human right. Now, according to Eric Tars, who's the director of the legal director of the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty, as he wrote in 2016 in an advocacy guide, polling indicates that 3/4 of Americans believe that adequate housing is a human right. And the American Bar Association published an article in 2019 describing adequate housing as a human right. And in March 2020, U.S. Representative from Washington State introduced into Congress the Housing is a Human Right Act of 2020. So is housing a human right? And what's the foundation for that assertion? Well, when I make that assertion, I'm grounding it in international law. Now, you might say, that's pretty far afield, Marie, that why are we going to international law? But I want you to know that the language and the process internationally on this issue, I believe, provides a foundation and a blueprint. So I'm going to give you a quick history lesson. Oops. In 1948, the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The U.S. helped draft it and signed it in 1948, and this is the first of 3 international documents that I'm going to mention. We'll come back to it in a minute. The second document is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It was adopted in 1969. It talks about rights and freedoms, the right to self-determination, the right to life, the death penalty only in the most egregious situations, life, liberty, and security of person, free from enslavement, free from cruel and unusual punishment. It reads a lot like our US Bill of Rights. President Carter signed this in 1977, and the US ratified it in 1992. So we signed on to this. And the third document is the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. This document talks about things like the right to work, essentially in a dignified and dignity and under safe conditions, the right to form and join trade unions, protections for family, including paid maternity leave, social security of some kind, to be free from hunger. And to our point, this document provides there's a right for everyone to an adequate standard of living for himself and his family, including adequate food, clothing, and housing, and to the continuous improvement of living conditions. So lots of really important recognition in this document about what it takes to live a dignified life. President Carter also signed this in 1977. I hope it doesn't shock anybody to know that we have not ratified that. But we're going to walk back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which the US did sign. And Article 25 of that document uses very similar language to the language I just quoted from the International Covenant on Social, Economic, and Cultural Rights. Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services, and a whole host of other things. So this article, Article 25, is both basic, right, really gives the basics, and expansive at the same time. So you might say, okay, oh look, there's a little cute person with the housing. What does that mean? What's the right to adequate housing mean? Well, we have all kinds of good documentation and all kinds of good information about what that would mean. So if you want to start talking about what is the right to adequate housing, I got it for you right here. Key aspects to the right to adequate housing. And this document really talks about rights, freedoms, and entitlements. So freedoms like protection against forced evictions, the right to be free from arbitrary interference with one's home, and entitlements like housing, land, and property restitution, equal and non-discriminatory access to adequate housing. This document also covers things that are not the right to adequate housing. For example, the right to adequate housing does not mean that the state or your government has to build housing for the entire population. But it also doesn't mean that this is just something aspirational. This is something that has immediate, current ramifications for people who've signed this. And it also recognizes that the right to adequate housing is linked to other human rights. And again, I give you all of this because if one of your goals is to advance the principle that housing is a human right, here's the goods. So is housing justice racial justice, or why is housing justice racial justice? In this topic, the first thing I'm going to do is recommend to you that you watch a 17-minute video that can be found at, and maybe you guys can type this into the chat, www.segregatedbydesign.com. It's by the person who wrote The Color of Law, Richard Rothstein, and this is a great piece of literature and research on the issues that we're talking about today. Richard Rothstein contends that the solution to our ills is a second civil rights movement. So that gives you an idea about his perspective. But the video is an excellent historical foundation of the housing injustices that we're trying to respond to. So why is housing justice race justice? Because the inadequate housing in our communities is linked through policy and law to race in the US. And as a result, making housing more equitable means increasing racial equity. So I'm going to walk through really quickly the progression in the 20th century of the link between housing and race. And, Alyssa and I did this together in some ways when we were trying to do some research on why are the rents so high in Akron. So this is what my mind is. Why are we why is it so hard for people to pay rent and maintain their rent? And why is it so high in Akron? And here's what I've come to understand. The first, let's see if I can make this come up. Oh, there we go. The first, the early barrier in the 20th century is redlining. And I'm counting on you to already know what that is. You know, redlining where the government drew up maps and said who could live where and where they were going to give loans to, and all the Black people were in the red areas and couldn't get loans. I mean, that's like a 3-second rendition of redlining. Please, 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 please get more than that on it. But the result of redlining is barriers to the accumulation of wealth. And that's because if you can't move around to more valuable property, if you can't trade up, you're stuck. You're unable to accumulate wealth in the way that most Americans accumulate wealth through their home ownership. And if you can't accumulate wealth and you don't have the benefit of the terms of loans that allow you to buy in at a lower buy-in, without the wealth, you're not able to purchase, right? So you lack the wealth to buy in, you're stuck in rental property. And so that leaves us with a high demand for rental property and insufficient supply and nominal protections, as we know, for tenants. And that means high prices for tenants because the options are limited. So the first two of these stages are explicitly race-based, right? Redlining and barriers to accumulation of wealth have been explicitly race-based. But the last three are really examples of the ongoing, right? This still happens now, the ongoing disparate impact of that initial racial insult, okay? So, and housing inequities feed barriers and disparities in everything. In health, right? If we live in unsafe communities, then we not only are stressed because our neighborhoods are unsafe, and we and our children are navigating that. And we may also be in physical danger if our neighborhoods are unsafe. And if we have unsafe living conditions in our home, we are subjecting our bodies to that environment as well, whether it's, bad air or leaking water or unsafe water or no heat. All those kinds of things have to do with housing and impact health. Education is similar, right? Our education system is resourced based on property taxes. And where property values haven't appreciated like they have in the suburbs for the people who are able to move out and trade up, again, the ongoing impact of redlining, loan practices for small businesses have not enabled these communities to thrive. And our legislature has not adequately addressed this despite 4 declarations of unconstitutionality in the way we fund public schools. Inadequate housing is linked to inadequate education. Employment, similarly, it's very difficult to maintain employment when you're unstably housed. And family stability, there's when you have housing instability as a family, you risk getting split apart in order to find safe shelter. And even at that rate, when you're split apart, the safety that you have, the protective energy of your family, you lose that. And so there's increased danger for family members in that regard. I don't know if you know, but it's very hard to get family shelter, especially if you have older boys, older sons in your family that you're trying to keep together. And the emotional damage and the trauma that causes really has a lifelong impact. So there are solutions in housing that decrease barriers and disparities in many of these areas. And there are policies that can change this trajectory. And I'm really excited to know that this is something that's important to this group. And I expect, and I'm looking forward to hearing, something that's takes what I've given you and grounds it some more in some concretely in what we're seeing and what we can do here in Akron. And I'm looking forward to the question and answer. So thanks very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marie. That was very informative. And I think that you were able to cover a lot of knowledge and information in a short time. So that was great. Thank you. So next we will give it to John.
Hello and welcome. Thanks for having me here. I'm glad to be part of this, and I work with Marie, and we kind of work on similar items often, but our work takes us in different directions. I deal more with the court process and those type of things. So I have a PowerPoint. I guess I can share it since I see the share the screen there, although I went back and forth with whether or not I'm going to do it, because I know that PowerPoint stuff can be a little overwhelming sometimes. But if it's there, I'll go ahead. So my presentation really is to talk about evictions in Akron in particular, and I'll go through a little bit of my background. We'll answer the question about, can you be evicted during the pandemic, even with the moratorium? And what about this moratorium? What about the right to counsel? And to touch on, Marie hit on this real well about how eviction is rooted in discrimination. But I like to draw the comparison to the foreclosure process. How can legal aid help? And make sure that I touch on the fact that rental assistance is in fact available. So a little background about me. I manage the housing and consumer team at Community Legal Aid. I have roots here in the area. I was born in Barberton. My father was a tire builder at Firestone. I attended University of Akron undergrad and got first involved with these issues of social justice with the Catholic Commission, who came down to U of A, had a presence there, and really got us thinking about these more global issues. I attended case law, and then I've been at Legal Aid for the past 15 years. So legal aid, many of you know what we do. We provide civil legal services to this 8-county region in Northeast Ohio, south of Cleveland. And our area covers, in particular, Akron, Canton, and Youngstown, who ironically have some of the highest rates of eviction in Ohio. So our team is real busy with defending tenants who are facing eviction. So some might think, well, we have this moratorium, and so nobody's getting evicted, right? Well, that's not true. So this coming week, I checked Akron Municipal Court docket, and they have about 40 to 50 evictions scheduled. Some get added in at the last minute, some get taken off. And this is a slow week because Monday is a holiday, and so normally they even have more, but Tuesday there's 14 cases, Thursday 10, Friday 16. Wednesday they do some other types of cases, so that's why they're not there. And then you've got a whole slew of other cases in Barberton and in Stowe. And so evictions are certainly alive and well, even though we have this moratorium. So just real quick to kind of touch on this moratorium, and here's a link to it if you know somebody or if you want to avail yourself to it. There's a declaration form that you can find at ohiolegalhelp.org. But the moratorium itself is a little bit of a misnomer, and because Ohio has not given the courts, or the federal government really hasn't given the courts a lot of guidance on how to apply this moratorium. And so Akron has actually been pretty tenant friendly, even with 40 to 50 eviction cases going a week, in that they have taken the view that if you give this declaration under the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, under that eviction moratorium guideline, if you give that to your landlord, then that case is going to be dismissed. And I think that's probably the appropriate way to do it. But other courts take a different view. We had a court, I had a case 2 weeks ago in Stowe, and the tenant lost her job during the pandemic, was working a little bit on and off, and submitted to the landlord the declaration, and the court just ignored it and went forward and issued an order for an eviction. And of course, we're objecting to that and going to go through the court process of that. But Stowe, they seem to say, well, they in my case, inexplicably, and it was talked about for quite a bit during the case, they just disregarded it. Other courts are making tenants prove that they made their very best efforts to pay rent and to avail themselves to the moratorium. And the guidelines of the moratorium do talk about that, but again, each court has a different view, and so kind of depending on where you are, certainly where you are in our 8-county region really matters as to how you get treated if you have an eviction. But even where you are in Summit County, the court's very different. So, as you probably know, there's no right to counsel for eviction cases. And this is a civil process. The right to counsel extends in criminal matters or where the state is taking your child. And as you might imagine, the experience with having an attorney and without one is vastly different. Cases in eviction court move very quickly. You talk about trials, and you get a longer trial on Judge Judy on TV than you do in eviction court. And this is only determining whether or not you will have a roof over your head, right? And so courts typically less than 5 minutes. Of course, if you have an attorney, those cases certainly go longer and your rights get protected, and we have vastly different outcomes, right, for our clients who have counsel versus the ones we see that don't. And ironically, one of the things that sort of just amazed me when I started doing housing work was how much education we had to give to the courts, to the magistrates that are hearing these cases. Many of them come in without really much knowledge and background at all about the eviction process. And so in many of our courts, we've educated the courts on the defenses that tenants have. And it amazed me about how many magistrates didn't know about these defenses. And so it's a vastly different process. Certainly if you don't have an attorney, you're going to be treated much differently. The roots of the eviction process is, as Marie said, there's certainly a racial element to it, but I like to use this comparison to how we treat homeowners versus renters. And so we know that foreclosures are a big issue too, but the evictions have just continued to rank at a extremely high level. Foreclosures have been up and down since 2008, and the banking crisis, they've come down, but evictions have remained steady. But thinking about the process, and so we have all these safeguards, these safety nets in place for homeowners, right? And so it's not that unusual if we think about a homeowner who might have life happen or the pandemic happens, right? And their hours get cut and they can't afford to make their house payment. There's all kinds of forbearance options for homeowners. There's the option to get your loan modified. And all of these things even happen before a court process begins. And once the court process begins, you get served with a foreclosure complaint. You've got 28 days to file an answer. You can request mediation. There's mediation in Summit County. In most of our larger communities, there's mediation. Mediation will extend the case. We'll talk about, have you tried to get a loan modification to save your home? There's government programs out there that will assist you free of charge in that loan modification process. And if all that doesn't work, the case may end up going to a foreclosure judgment, but you're still not put out of the home. It's got to go through a sheriff's sale process. Most people that may face an eviction, it's well over a year, sometimes 2 to 3 years before they might ever be set out of their home. Compare that to the eviction process that has none of those aforementioned safety nets that I said. And you can have your trial scheduled within a few weeks of being served with the eviction complaint, and you can be set out. Really, I've seen eviction cases go from start to finish in less than 1 month. Now that's a little quick. Most of them are running into the 2 months maybe process, but when I say start to finish, I mean start of the landlord giving you notice and the bailiff setting your stuff out on the street. You know, that's start to finish, and it happens really quick. And of course, we know that there's a discriminatory impact, obviously, on low income people, and there's a disproportionate number of women and minorities that face evictions versus the general population. And so, how can we help? So legal aid is set up to try to help. We've been actively involved in our community with United Way, and there was the Summit County Cares program to help people. And during that process, we helped several hundred tenants avoid eviction just over the past couple of months. But if you want to get a hold of us, there we have a tenant assistance hotline, the 330-983-2528. We also have a virtual toolkit with a lot of information, including your rights as a renter. If you go to our website, communitylegalaid.org/eviction, you can find a lot of information there. And I will plug too that we also have a weekly Zoom clinic. So anybody that is worried about an eviction, you know, obviously they can call us, but they can also just drop in 4 o'clock every Tuesday on Zoom, and we have attorneys there who will answer questions and give an overview of the process. And you can find that link if you go to this communitylegalaid.org/eviction, go to our webpage, and there'll be a link to our Zoom event. You can go to our normal webpage, just communitylegalaid.org, and look on the eviction events page there, and it'll tell you about what's coming up. So one little piece before I stop on rental assistance, just so you know, and again, this spreadsheet is at our on our website, but there is substantial rental assistance available, and that is available generally through your 211. United Way has done a great job. Community Action has done a great job with having rental assistance available. One of the problems, though, is that it takes time to get that money into our community. And so, you know, Congress just authorized another round of money, but the rental assistance providers haven't put that money out there yet. And as you saw, the courts are still going forward with evictions. And so we need this current moratorium is set to expire the end of January. If it does expire, there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of people in our community out on the street, because even though the rental assistance is there, it takes time to access that. And so hopefully it will be extended, and I think that would have a much lesser dramatic impact on our clients. It would allow them to get the assistance available. So anyway, that's what I've got. If you've got questions about any of that in the process, you know, feel free in the chat. I'll be there, or get a hold of us, or stop by and see us at our Zoom clinic on Tuesday. So thank you.
Great, John. Thank you so much. That was very informative, and I honestly hadn't even thought of the differences between the evictions process and the foreclosure process. So that was an especially good comparison, I think, to make. So then next we have Drew Reilly, who also has a guest.
Yeah, apologies. That's why my camera kept turning off.
No worries.
Splitting childcare duties with my wife tonight. So I'm Drew Reilly. I'm the staff attorney over at the Summit County Land Bank. But previously to that, I served as a judicial attorney for Judge Nicole Walker, who's the former presiding judge of the Akron Municipal Court. That's kind of how I got tied into housing issues and the eviction crisis. It's actually how I got pulled in to meet John and Marie for the first time at the eviction task force. One of the big things that I was working on there was trying to get a a sealing process for evictions, because currently right now there is, at least in Ohio, there's I want to say 2 communities that allow you to seal your evictions in a formal process. There's no state law that, forbids it, but there's also no state law that kind of sets the process. So we tried to develop a policy and a rule change that would allow the defendants in eviction cases at the municipal court to seal their records once they've hit certain criteria. Those efforts are still ongoing. I haven't been at the court for a year now, and so I'm a little less tuned into the back room, how that happens and all the negotiations there. But I'm still hopeful that we can get some movement on there. We've been able to get some movement on some other issues that the eviction task force has worked on. So again, I'm hopeful, and that's kind of the main point of my part of the presentation tonight is what are the barriers, political and legal, to changing some of these housing policies and trying to confront some of the eviction crisis. So I threw in the chat right before I started speaking the link to Princeton University's eviction lab. That's kind of where I got my first exposure to this. Has data from across the United States, city, county. It's broken down by jurisdiction, so you can compare how's Akron doing compared to New York, or how's Akron doing compared to Summit County as a whole. So I think that's very important. It's good data to use going forward, because everything I've learned is data is one of the best ways you can affect public policy change at a local level. Real quickly too, I also served until this past July as a council person in the city of Cuyahoga Falls. So I have a unique perspective on the political process, especially at the municipal level. So I kind of broke down some of the barriers at 3 main levels: 1 state level barriers, 2 county level barriers, and then 3 city and jurisdiction level barriers. And I think John kind of pointed out that the state of Ohio is very landlord friendly in the way that the law is written. So section 1923, the forcible entry and detainer, is the eviction statute, and there are strict guidelines that need to be followed, and strict procedures that kind of dictate how some of the local jurisdictions are able to effectuate policy. On top of that, I'm sure most of you are aware, because you're members of DSA, that gerrymandering is a major barrier to trying to affect any type of policy change at the state level. So the work through the eviction task force has focused mostly on county and city level barriers, and those are they're surmountable. They're not easy barriers to get past, but they're a little bit easier than the gerrymandering issues that we're facing at the state level, especially because we don't have a lot of friendly faces at the state house. So county level issues, the big barrier there is that because one of the advantages at the city level is the state of Ohio allows for home rule. So cities are able to effectuate their own changes at the local city level. The downside there is then if you have a pretty friendly county or a county body that wants to do some work, they're a little bit more limited, because the city is able to actually kind of countermand any county level policies. So there's some of those multi-level federalism issues that if the county were to pass something, there's some legal distinctions of whether or not that applies to the cities and villages or just in the unincorporated townships. They also aren't typically involved in eviction processes. As John pointed out, they are involved in some foreclosure issues. The county common pleas court is where foreclosure issues are decided, but they don't hear eviction cases. Those are heard at the municipal court level. Once we kind of get down at the city and jurisdiction level, it's more of the same. It's very fragmented. What you want to pass in the city of Akron doesn't apply in the village of Mogador or the city of Talmadge. So you kind of have to, if you have a policy change you want to confront, you have to take a full-pronged approach and approach all those different communities individually. Complicating that, the County of Summit also has 3 municipal court jurisdictions. There's the Stowe Municipal Court, the Barberton Municipal Court, and the Akron Municipal Court. And I'm sure all of you are aware that there are more communities than there are than 3 in the county. So if the city of Akron does something, it is impacted by what the Akron Municipal Court does, but that's also, the Akron Municipal Court also covers the village of Mogador. They cover Springfield Township, Coventry. So each of these individual individual municipalities also have policy changes that will be impacted by another body. So that's to say, if Akron City Council wants to pass something, they also have to have the municipal court on board for enforcement. Kind of along the same lines there, Akron City Council can pass something, but they're also not the ones executing the decisions. So they have to have the mayor's office on board too. If City Council wants to pass something about housing, that every house or every rental property is inspected before it's relet in between every tenant, they have to have the mayor's housing department on board as well. They can't just pass a law and then just hope that it gets passed, and things actually get done. So you have to kind of bridge a broad coalition of differing opinions and differing prioritization. Then at each level, so in Muni Court, especially in Akron Municipal Court, there are 6 individual judges and then a clerk of courts as well. So one individual judge can say, I'm going to allow this and I'm going to do this in my courtroom, but that doesn't necessarily force the other judges to do the same thing. And I think John could probably echo my point here. Some of the judges have actually granted eviction sealings of eviction records, whereas some of the other judges haven't, even without having a formal process in place. So you do get a disproportionate impact of justice there, because it depends on what judge you get, what magistrate you get, and what day. Same thing with the city. You get city council, and then you also have a mayor's office. So you have to corral a lot of different people and make sure everyone's understanding the what you want passed and how you want it passed. At the local level too, you also have landlords are a considerably more organized group than tenants' rights groups are. I think here in Summit County, we're a little lucky that we have a good coalition of people working on the eviction task force. I mean, Fair Housing Contact Services has been amazing. Community Legal Aid's been amazing. The Summit County Land Bank is not a tenant advocacy group, but we are a property organization and a property organization and slightly a housing organization. So we're at the table, and we have a lot of good people across the spectrum trying to work on this. But we are significantly less funded than landlords, and we have less of a political pressure on some of the elected officials. Another big issue that John actually hit on is there's a lack of education at all levels. City council members, judges, magistrates, clerk of courts offices. One of the things that just infuriates me to no bounds is the clerk of courts will say in one thing that they'll accept any type of filing without looking at the legal requirements of it, because that's not their job, is to determine whether something should be filed, but then turn around on rent escrow procedures, and if the tenant doesn't strictly follow the rent escrow procedures, they won't accept the filing. That's a specific one I've encountered at the Akron Municipal Court. And I don't know how we change that unless we get a different clerk of courts in there. But it's lack of education. One of the big things that we did when I was at the Akron Municipal Court is we brought fair housing in to educate the judges and the magistrates and any judicial attorneys that were interested in it to try and, bridge that gap. But that's not a mandated training by the state, by the court. It's just this is something we wanted to do and that the judges all felt was an important step. So lack of education is a major, major issue. And then when you start talking about part-time counsel people in some of these smaller communities, not all of them have a legal background. Not all of them have a social justice background. And some of them are actually landlords. When I was on Akron City Council, I want to say 3 of my Republican counterparts on council were landlords. So anytime I tried to even broach this subject of even rental registry, because that's not, mandated across every community in the county, I got pushback from there. So you face that barrier too. Same thing, and this is one I've talked with Shamus Malik about extensively, is even the political officials and the people you have on your side, there's significant burnout. Jameson, can you calm down for a second? There's significant burnout on some of the on trying to confront these issues. Again, part-time counsel people can only devote a certain amount of time to each issue, and if we don't have allies working with us or people, Jameson, people.
If you need to parent. The parents
Yeah, well,
give you permission.
Give me about 2 minutes.
I feel like this is an issue that we never thought we probably would have faced, but pandemic times, and we're all looking into each other's houses and getting to know each other in a uniquely intimate way that we probably wouldn't have otherwise. So it's maybe not so bad.
Sorry about that. My wife took Jameson. He's an 18-month-old. Yeah, burnout is a major issue, especially since going back to most of the time a council position is a part-time job and we don't have support staff. So one of the big things that whenever I wanted to pass any type of policy change, I needed to employ the mayor's office or an advocacy group to assist me in actually writing the legislation and doing all the the grassroots support of getting it passed. So you do have burnout. And then same thing, kind of in the same vein, prioritization of issues. While you might have a mayor that's on board, his staff might not see this as a priority. And if you don't have the staff or the assistance, your what you want to get done is definitely going to take a back seat to what they want done. So those are kind of the major political issues I see confronting this. Some of the advantages that Summit County had, I already touched on it. We have a bunch of active groups confronting this. I mean, the fact that you guys are here on a Saturday night right now, just talking about this issue, shows me that there is at least another active group that's willing to, put some pressure on some of these officials. It's funny, I actually got calls from some of the members of Akron DSA when I was on city council about various issues. And I was able to tell them, hey, I'm a member of the DSA of America. I haven't, this is my first time attending an Akron meeting, but that's more of a scheduling thing than a ideological thing. So I'm actually wearing my pin right now. So I'm a member. So there are friendly faces across the county. And I know while I might be one of the vocal members of DSA that was or is a elected official, there are a lot of friendly faces behind the scenes that might not be as willing to put their face to an organization that's not viewed as centrist. I don't have that problem and I don't have that worry, so I'm perfectly happy to say that. So there are a lot of good active groups out there doing this. So the fact that you guys are doing this is it's a great first step. And we're going to have to lean on you guys and make some more relationships. I know that the Socialist Rifle Association has a Northeast Ohio chapter. They're a great resource too that's doing a lot of work in this avenue. They're working with some of the organizations you guys have worked with. I know Food Not Bombs is a big one they've worked with. They've also worked with a lot of Cleveland organizations. And if we're going to start bringing some Cleveland organizations into this fold as well, you run into the same issues that I discussed confronting it, but it's exacerbated at a further rate because you're also bringing different counties and different cities, and some of that that rivalry of people not wanting to do something because Akron not wanting to do something because Cleveland's doing it, and vice versa. So you just exacerbate some of those issues, but that doesn't stop us from working with grassroots organizations or organizations that are doing some of the same work. I mean, John and I were on a call, what was it, last week or 2 weeks ago, with Toledo or Dayton. I losing track of which one it was, but some of the some of the work they've done to try and figure out, hey, how did you guys get it done? You were able to pass some things that we haven't been able to pass here. Share some of your best practices. How'd you actually do it? So I see a lot of that across the state and across the county. So that makes me happy. As I said, also, we have a more friendly group of elected officials. While there are some a lot of centrist Democrats located across the county, they're a bit more friendly than if we were in a heavily right-wing or heavily conservative area. So we do have some allies that might not be members of our organization but they're friendly to our organization out there. So that's a good way to build a relationship instead of trying to bridge that hard ideological divide. I've found that we can probably bring some people that would be more centrist on things on board with us through just finding common ground. So that's a big plus. And then what we need now then is just kind of direction and leadership. And I probably, Alyssa, you're probably thinking I'm beating a dead horse here because I say it all the time at Eviction Task Force. We need someone to step up and kind of say, I'm going to take this and make it mine, and here are the actionable next steps. Because, well, it's I've been having this conversation for over 2 years now with a lot of allies. It's now time to actually take those conversations and say, all right, this is where we're going to start, and this is how we're going to actually affect change. So that's kind of my nebulous discussion of the barriers I see, but also next steps that I think we can take, and love to have questions from you guys and take it from there.
Great, thank you so much for that, Drew. And as next steps, we do have some exciting news to share, but we're going to do questions first. So let's see here. First question I have, I think I'll probably just put these to Heather said if you have more questions, then keep them coming to her in the chat. You can send a DM. I'm just going to put these to each of the panelists because I don't have it specified if they're supposed to go to anyone in particular, but I guess this first one probably goes to Marie and John. Is it helpful for DSA to share legal aid info?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things, like I mentioned, we have our Zoom clinic, and it's a way to try to reach out. During the pandemic, we have tried to be actively involved in the community pre-pandemic. I would be out at the front porch once a month. Marie's got a ton of events that we were out in the community, but during the pandemic, it's been much more difficult to do that. So we've been trying to open up other avenues. We have Facebook Live every Wednesday at 5 with a different topic for people. So I think spreading that, and the reason I mentioned the Zooms, because we don't have a lot of attendance. So we have a handful of people that show up every week, and I'm thinking, man, I know there's more people that need the help. I mean, we get a lot of calls, no doubt, and that's the saving grace that I think that people, call us maybe rather than get on the Zoom. But yeah, share the information. I think the worst thing that can happen is people becoming homeless when they didn't need to be if they had access to counsel.
Marie, did you have anything you wanted to add to that from the legal aid perspective? Okay.
No, only that if somebody tries to reach me through my phone number or email that I put on the screen, you will have to poke me endlessly because, as Lisa can tell you, you fall below the fold really quickly in my inbox. So,
Busy person.
I just get a lot of emails.
All right, so the next one that I have here is, and I think that this could probably get some different perspectives from each of the speakers. What is the eviction rate in Akron and why is it so high? Let's see. Do you want to start that, Marie?
Well, I'm gonna ask John to look up the eviction rate while I talk about the reasons, and I think, hang on, is that better? I think that one of the things that I talked about, one of the things that Alyssa and I worked so hard on trying to figure out is why are the rents so high, right? The reason that the evictions are so high is that people can't pay their rent. And so why is it that we have people, we don't have people in Akron that are any more, freeloaders or ne'er-do-wells than anywhere else. And in fact, most of the people, that I don't find people who are trying to take advantage of landlords. They just want a place that they can afford to live, and that's decent. And I think that this issue about wealth and resources and why are our rents so high and why do we have so little protection for our tenants, that those are the things that drive our rent. So when we say, you're stuck in the rental market and the market is imperfect for a commodity like housing in Akron because our supply is insufficient, and we don't have, in our income, we have a significant income disparity in our community where people who are low income are not making a living. They're not making a living wage. They're not making what it costs to get housing. It takes 80 hours a week full time to pay for a 2-bedroom. So if you're single parenting or only one of the adults in your household can work, you're behind the 8 ball all the time. And you're just one small disaster, whether it's somebody breaks into your car or, something's going on with one of your kids and you miss a couple of days of work. You're just one short, small disaster or bump away from not being able to pay your rent. And landlords don't even have to accept rent from you if it comes from a source they don't like, right? They could say, if you're behind on your rent and you try to get CARES money, stimulus money through the rental assistance program to pay your rent, the landlord is not obligated to take that. If you're behind on your rent, the landlord can say, I'm not taking your rent, I'm evicting you. And that's their right. So John can correct me if I'm being overly zealous. There you go, John.
No, I think you're right on the money. And so I think in the chat, we had the eviction lab in there, and I can share the screen maybe a moment. So it's interesting. If you go to the eviction lab, this is a little bit outdated because it's 2016, but I would suggest that the numbers have probably gotten worse since that time. And so hopefully you can see my screen, but if you go to evictionlab.org, you can see the top evicting large cities in Ohio. And so that's the rate of eviction, 6% of tenants. And so Akron leads all the large cities in Ohio. And then if you want to look at mid-sized cities, you can see Canton, as I mentioned earlier, is right there. And if you switch it to sort of number of evictions, Canton actually mid-sized cities is the top by a wide margin. And then if you think about, well, why is this in Ohio? Where do we rank in the United States? And of course, like Canton is 9th in the whole United States for mid-sized cities. And ironically, if you look at these, most of these are like southern. I mean, there's Virginia there, but you know, and again, so I think that's concerning. If we look at Akron in terms of larger cities, and we do it by the eviction rate, you know, Akron's still within the bound is 24th in the country in large size cities. So you know, there's questions about why, and those are deeper. But I think, as Marie mentioned, it has a lot to do with redlining, because a lot of those historically, you know, Akron was a factory town, you know, and a lot of that housing in the city was built for the factory workers, and they had the opportunity to buy those homes. And then, as you know, those it's sort of in the early part of the 19th in the 1900s there. But after that, when you start seeing the white flight to the suburbs, of course, the white folks had the opportunity to get loans and to get into the suburbs. A lot of those properties in the city turned into rental properties, and they just haven't been maintained. And of course, it's a you know, and that's a generalization. I'm sure there are some nice rental properties in Akron, but as we know, as for overall, we see this in areas where you had the white flight, you had the industrialized growth in the early 1900s, and those properties not being maintained, and then the African American population being sort of having no other options other than to live there. And I think that has contributed to a higher eviction rate.
Great, thank you very much. And I saw Drew was putting some of the stats in there as well. And then we shared some books that are useful in the chat. There's Evicted by Matthew Desmond is a great resource for kind of understanding the evictions and how they affect people. And then the other one was Color of Law. That is the author who did the video that Marie was talking about earlier. And that book specifically focuses on redlining. So let me see what the next question is here.
Real quick, if I can just build off of that.
Drew.
I will say that Evicted is takes Matthew Desmond looks at Milwaukee, but a lot of what he talks about, it also applies to Akron. You know, some of his portrayals of how eviction court happen are exactly the way they would happen at the Akron Municipal Court, in ways that they play out every day. So, you know, don't take it as that, you know, don't read it and say that's what's happening in Akron, you know, statute by statute, but know that it's a pretty applicable translation. And one of the other things I just want to add to John's and Marie's point about why we're having this issue. One of the things we've talked about many times is the housing stock itself. I mean, and it's one of the things that we've talked around, and there's no easy way to solve the issue. Is any housing that's being built, any new housing, is way high end. I mean, in Cuyahoga Falls, in the Valley, we're talking upper 200, lower $300,000 housing, but you're not seeing a lot of you know, the area I represented in Cuyahoga Falls was the east side of Cuyahoga Falls, right by Chapel Hill. If you're familiar with that area, it's the Heslop home area. That the houses were built in the 50s, the slab homes with 2-3 bedrooms on all the houses at the time. I don't know what they cost at the time, but now you can buy one of those houses for under $100,000. No one's building housing development like that right now. On a grand scale. I mean, you have a lot of great organizations, East Akron Neighborhood Development Corporation, you have Habitat for Humanity, you have some of these one-off, single family houses, but no big developments that are occurring. So one of the things that we're trying to figure out is how can we replenish our stock, because we do have a lot of houses that are substandard right now that probably could be good if we put some money into it. And there's some organizations doing some good work, like the Wells CDC over in the Middlebury neighborhood in Akron. They're doing a lot of great renovation work. And I work with them a lot at the Summit County Land Bank. Most of what we do is try and take delinquent, vacant, abandoned, and blighted housing and try and turn it back into productive use. I mean, that's exactly why we were created. But, you know, we're not the end developer on most of these properties. We are a mechanism to get end developers. So that's, again, no answer to that, just another issue that I've noticed and that I think we should focus on.
So I have something to add to that. One of the things that Richard Rothstein points out, and this little 17-minute video, he talks about it, but he also talks about it in his book, is that, you know, if we really wanted to right the wrong that we created with redlining, where you know, white people were able to buy property and trade up and accumulate wealth from their homes and do all the things that my generation had advantages of, because my father's generation was able to take advantage of through the GI Bill and through all kinds of other things, you know, cheap home rates. And so then there was, you know, we got to move to somewhere where the schools were better. And then we got to, you know, take money, equity out of the house to send people to college and all those kinds of things. If we really wanted to right that wrong, that generational wrong, then we would say, okay, let's lower the buy-in for those properties, right? Let's find comparable properties, because you can't just say, okay, well, I'm going to open up the market now. We can't discriminate, because just like Drew was saying, housing now is not affordable. And for people who have had 3 generations of not accumulating wealth, they can't buy in now just because now you say it's okay. You have to be able to find them the opportunity to buy in at the place that they would have been able to buy in had we not torqued what we did, had we not made it impossible for them to take the steps that white people were able to take. So, you know, he's got some ideas about how to do that, but it's really a how do we make that, how do we right that wrong?
Excellent point. Thank you, Marie, for sharing that. Yeah, and I think that's looks like Bryn dropped a link about generational poverty, and I think that's an important through line with all of this, is that, like, this is not a new thing. This is something that has been accumulating over generations, and it is also not happenstance. This is, you know, something that was intentional, that was done, you know, legislatively. So the next question that I have says that it is for everyone. Are campaign donations from property owners a contributing factor to local housing issues? So kind of, is there some muddying of the waters going on here, possibly with people maybe doing, maybe not things that aren't illegal, but might be a little unethical? So that's an interesting question. I don't know who wants to take that to start.
I can only say that it varies based on the official. I mean, I made a conscious effort when I was on Cuyahoga Falls. I specifically refused to accept a donation from a developer because I didn't agree with what he was doing in the valley. So could it be a determining factor? It could. But I'm not going to say that the only reason it hasn't gotten passed right now is because of political contributions. I think there's a lot of other barriers that, you know, I discussed that are the main impact. But, you know, is it possible that there's a landlord that donates a significant amount of money to a majority of you know, community's council people, and that's the you know, that's the deciding factor? It's possible, but I don't think it's the main issue.
John or Marie, did you have anything that you wanted to add on that question?
No.
You know, I will just say, you know, I mean, it's, you know, who knows, right? But when you look at our system and the way it's set up, you know, I think it's still true. Like in Barberton Municipal Court, none of the judges live in Barberton, right? And so you've got, you know, so Barberton, encompasses green, right? And so you've got this sort of wealthy suburbia, and the judges, you know, and again, I'll have to look to see the latest who's in there now, the elections, but last time I looked, like, they're all from green, you know. And so in terms of your voice being heard, you know, the where you live and who's has access, you know, you've got, you know, that different dynamic, you know, for who's there. And then, you know, we often hear about, and, you know, the schooling, and then Marie, this is an issue close to her, and certainly education, and education's funded by property taxes, and so where you go to school, you know, and the budgets of that schooling based on your property taxes of where you live. So we've made that conscious choice to say that, you know, if you live in a poorer area, your school's going to be funded more poorly. But we don't seem to apply that same standard to, like, our courts, right? Because where you live in Barberton, you know, you're not necessarily being judged by people who live in Barberton, right? You're being judged. We expand those boundaries. We want to share that sort of political capital among, you know, a multitude of areas. So we make that choice there, but we don't do it in other areas. So.
One more point I'd like to add real quick to that, that I just thought about. Political contributions are public. You can look up to see who's donating to a local official's campaign, but we don't have a very robust system on the Summit County Board of Elections website. One thing that I've advocated for with some of my counterparts and other people who are involved in politics is trying to compile all that data into a actual database to search. Because right now you could look up this, you know, individual council person, find out who donated to them, but you can't type in someone's name and see who they've donated to at the local level. I think that would, if we had access to that or had that ability, we might be able to see more patterns to see if, you know, hey, this landlord is donating to this, you know, all these people. The only way you could do that right now is to look at each individual official across the entire county, across multiple reports too, because you have to file at least 2 reports as an elected official of campaign contributions a year, and it turns into 4 during an election year. So it's just a lot of immense raw data that's not been put into any type of database. So if you're interested in campaign integrity and electioneering and all that, that is a project I've been advocating for about 8 years now. And there hasn't been any real movement. So
I just shared in the chat because I spent most of my day yesterday on it for the fracking stuff, how you look up that stuff. And it's definitely a lot more clunky than some of the federal sites. Yep. So it took a lot of work, but you know, I was able to find it, but yeah, it took a lot of work. And basically it's just looking at a bunch of scanned in PDFs, and sorting through them yourself. So it's a lot of footwork. Let me see, what's the next question here? Why are judges lacking in education about housing issues? And I put that to all of the speakers. It says, who wants to start with that?
Well, the real answer is they're just attorneys, just like the rest of us. And there's nothing about being an attorney that makes you a more educated or more intelligent human being. It's just a profession. It's not a you know, a divine power or a secret code or anything like that. It's just we're just people. They have to win elections, so they're we might not be electing the most intelligent. We're electing the most electable judges, and the reality is at the municipal court, as far as judges' time, evictions don't take up a large part of their time. It's mostly criminal cases that they're seeing. You know, they're the final arbiter on whether or not an eviction is granted, but the practical way it happens is you actually go into an eviction hearing with a magistrate. The magistrate has the hearing, writes up the decision. They then send it to a judge to approve. And that the way it works at the Akron Municipal Court is each judge takes a week to approve all of the small claims, magistrate decisions, any type of garnishment hearings, any dismissals that are just based on whether or not someone hasn't responded or has failed to prosecute the case in the given time, and all evictions, all writs of restitution. They just approve all of them. So they're not the ones hearing the case. It's the magistrates. And what they are seeing is usually a sheet that another lawyer has come up and said, this is what we should do. The only time they're actually going to hear the facts of a case are if someone objects to the magistrate's decision. And on top of just objecting the magistrate's decision, they have to include a transcript of the proceeding, which costs money to put a deposit down, unless you can get a affidavit of indigency, which is not always guaranteed. So it's just time, and it's not the major concern of the court or the individual judges. And John and Marie can probably echo my point and elaborate on it. So,
yeah, I'll jump in and Marie's got something, but I, one of the choices we've made, right? We don't have a housing court, right? And we have more eviction cases than we have divorce cases, and we certainly have domestic relations court, and we have a multitude of judges and a multitude of magistrates, that do domestic cases. But when you hear judges running for office, what do you always hear? Tough on crime, right? And that's the idea, and so the idea of eviction cases is, it's sort of, as Drew said, those are kind of where, that's the cases nobody wants to deal with, right? And they throw them off to the magistrates, and magistrates, of course, are not appointed based on any kind of competency. It's generally some kind of connection to the judge, and I'm not saying that they're all bad. Some of them are very highly educated and very well versed, but it amazes to me how many are not, right? And they're making these decisions, and so we've just we've made that choice that again we just don't really care that much about the rights of tenants.
We do have, when I think about it, I'm thinking about legal aid people who have gone on to be magistrates. And we've had a couple in Medina from time, over time. I don't know of any that we've had in Akron. And I don't know of any judges, right? I'm not sure that housing justice is I haven't seen that on an election flyer. Yeah. But it's, and there's, and what I'm really saying also is that when an attorney makes a shift from being an attorney to a judge, right? Chances are pretty good that their background is not in landlord tenant law at a residential level, right? Even if it's in landlord tenant law, it's more likely to be commercial. So you just we're not bringing in the people who come with that already. So you have to have the time and energy and interest to create it yourself.
Yeah, Marie, I can think of one judicial attorney that worked for Community Legal Aid, and that's at the Common Pleas Court, and that's Paul Zindel. Didn't he work at Community Legal Aid at one point?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's the only example I can think of.
Well, I wasn't thinking of judicial attorneys, actually. So Jamie Poe's there somewhere too, isn't she, John?
Yes.
So we do have a couple of judicial attorneys who've come through, which helps, right?
Yeah, because just from experience, because of the priority, my judge gave me almost the entire civil docket to control. Obviously she was the one that signed off on everything, and she looked at everything, but it wasn't her focus.
So for the sake of being respectful for everybody's time, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get to share all of the questions, though some of them I think can be answered with some of the other ones. So The next one that I have here is Akron has a large refugee and immigrant population that are primarily renters. Do your organizations have any additional assistance for accessibility for non-English speakers fighting eviction and housing discrimination? And that's for everyone.
We have any entity in the country that gets any kind of federal money has an obligation to meet the needs of their limited English proficient constituents, residents, citizens, people. So not only, does legal aid have an obligation to do that, which we meet with in various ways, whether it's in-person interpretation or over the, using a service over the phone. But the courts should also be doing that. And so when somebody walks in to ask a question, the person they shouldn't have to bring an interpreter with them. When they walk into AMHA, they shouldn't have to bring an interpreter with them, right? Anybody who is part of any kind of federal structure, gets any kind of federal money, is under that obligation. And I say that with that kind of irritation because it's another place where I feel like we're educate. I mean, it's not like legal aid's perfect at it. We have built up the ability over time. It's not easy to do and it costs money. But we like Bryn is putting in the chat, we have resources in our community to help us figure out how to do this. We have resources to pay to do it. And we, for the places that haven't stepped up yet, it's time.
Yeah, and North Hill, of course, a huge area, but it's also, Marie and I both work on matters related to lead paint, and lead paint's a big issue, right, in those homes, especially North Hill and in the city of Akron. And we actually have one landlord that we have a lead paint issue with a family, non-English speaking family. And on one hand, the landlord told us, he said, well, I love the immigrant community. They brought so much to North Hill. They brought, vitality, and they're hard workers. And it's just, he said it saved North Hill, because he said, the way things were going. And so he's thrilled about that. But on the other hand, he's got a property that's got lead paint, and he's offering to sort of move the family to another house. But he says, I'll move them there, but I don't want that house to be inspected. And I said, what do you mean you don't want to? Well, because I'm not sure, there's still maybe some issues there, but I'll fix, So on one hand, there's this idea that the immigrant community is great because, it's bringing in rents, and it's filling their houses, and they're cleaning up the community. But on the other hand, there's still, the idea that people will take advantage of vulnerable people. And so it's an ongoing struggle. But yeah, we're out there. We're trying to help those. There's other organizations, but yeah, it's frustrating sometimes.
How dare they have the audacity to force the landlords to meet the minimum requirement?
It's unfortunate and frustrating to hear, but I appreciate you, sharing that with us, John. Like it's kind of enraging for me, honestly, but not surprising at the same time, which I think is probably how I felt for the past couple of years. So let's see, what is the next question that I have here? So there were a couple of questions that were about policy attempts and kind of what is happening in Akron right now surrounding any policy that would work towards furthering housing justice and making that a reality. And then someone specifically asked about making discrimination against Section 8 housing illegal.
So there's some really, really good energy right now around policy change, both through the eviction task force, which you've heard us mention a number of times in Fair Housing Contact Service. really is the leading energy around that. But many of us, I mean, Drew and John and I and a host of other advocates in the community sit at that table. And in fact, I'm standing in today for somebody from Fair Housing who intended to be here, but she had something came up in her family life, and she wasn't able to be here. And there's so eviction task force is one really good place where stuff is going on, and the city of Akron is also very engaged in this issue, because as part of its racial equity and social justice work, which it spawned from the racism as a public health crisis proclamation that they took on over the summer. So we have two places where we're talking about housing policy with good energy. The kinds of things, there's a few things that we kind of are researching, like, will this work? Will that work? Can we make any progress on this? One of the things you heard us talk about is sealing eviction records, because turns out if you have an eviction on your record, the landlord's agency that they have go out and, they say, go see if this person has an eviction on their record, to come back with a report that says, yep, they have an eviction on their record. Well, it might not be an eviction. It might not have ever been an eviction. It might have just been that somebody filed an eviction against them that was dismissed. Might be that they were wrongly named in the eviction. Might be that they never were evicted because they paid everything up. Or it might be that they were evicted, but whatever happened in their life was a reasonable enough thing to result in that they shouldn't be punished for it with never being able to get housing for the next 20 years, because that's how long people go back and look at things. And you'd say, oh, hey, I don't know, what I was saying, there's a lot more demand than supply, right? Somebody comes in with an eviction mark on their record, whether it's legit or not, they just go in the no pile. So the sealing of eviction records is a really important piece. And we've struggled with that in our jurisdiction, but we haven't given up on it. So you talked to somebody that said something about Section 8 housing. Well, when I was talking about the fact that landlords don't have to accept CARES money, if you're behind in rent, they can just say, no, I don't want to take your money. Landlords can say, you see it in their ads, right? No Section 8. In our state, there's no protection for tenants who are going to pay for their rents out of Section 8 with Section 8 vouchers, which is a little odd, right? Because that means you're going to get your rent paid, right? That's a voucher. It says somebody's going to pay the rent. But landlords have decided that that's a population that they don't want to deal with, whether it's because of the extra, whether it's because somebody's going to look at the property and say it has to meet certain standards and they don't want to be scrutinized, or because they've decided that people who get Section 8 are not the kind of people they want in their houses. So that feels like code to many of us. But we don't have that protection in Ohio, and it is a policy protection that we could potentially move forward on at a local or state level. I think that Cleveland has made some progress on that, and there are other jurisdictions in the state and in the country that have made good progress on that. So that's another one that we would love to see come together. Right to counsel, I think that that's probably a lot farther, that's on the wish list, but it's not low-hanging fruit. Because we know, and New York City particularly is doing a lot on right to counsel right now. And even Cleveland is moving forward on that. Because we know that 99% of landlords are represented, and and almost no tenants are represented. And when you have a lawyer as a tenant, you do a lot better. So we know that would make a big difference. One of the other things that we are exploring is how we can incorporate mediation into housing court in a meaningful way that's honors the judicial system, keeps things moving forward, but that people have the opportunity to make the landlord whole or make arrangements to make the landlord whole and stay in their housing. With with a mediator helping them come to an agreement. So there are policies, and many of them are in different stages of massage right now, to bring them bring them to the next step of potential enactment or adoption in Akron.
John, Drew, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
The only thing I'd add to that is that we as the eviction task force and everything, we keep saying Akron. That's not stopping us from going into these other communities. And
that's a great point.
We haven't had a unified strategy of how we're going to do that. But I do know that there are some communities that we could probably make some inroads in while we're doing some of the bigger work in Akron, because Akron is the vast majority of the people that live in the county. So we impact more people by passing it in Akron, but that doesn't stop us from doing some of this work in some of the smaller outlying communities. And that might actually be a good strategy to show Akron that, hey, look, it worked in Mogadore. Why aren't we doing it here too? So
right, I agree.
As we move forward there, keep in mind that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And I hope that we will.
That's a great point. I think that it's easy to kind of fall into the like Akron centric mindset. I mean, I know that a lot of us on this call probably do live within Akron proper, but I know some of us don't. And evictions are still happening in the surrounding areas too. So it's not just an Akron problem. It's a problem that ripples out beyond Akron and even beyond Summit County, but Summit County is kind of where we can focus our efforts right now.
Yeah, and believe it or not, too, Akron actually has more protections than a lot of the outlying communities that probably would be on board with granting the same. The one that comes to mind is the non-discrimination in housing for LGBT status. That's not in every community in the county. That's something I worked on the 3 years I was on council in Cuyahoga Falls, and we still haven't got it done for most of the reasons I said before, burnout and prioritization. There are things that there's some easy wins in the surrounding area that we could be focusing on.
Great, thank you. So just because I know I had tried to promise as close as I could to an hour and a half, Marie, thank you for staying. I wanted to wrap things up and thank everyone for your time. This has been great. It's been very exciting to see so many people interested in housing. Bryn, you have something you wanted to add?
I'm about to share all the links, so give me a second.
I was getting there. So I know, and Drew, I hope it's makes you a little happy to know that we do have a plan for something that we're going to do, some action item that's a takeaway. So Cleveland DSA has been doing a lot of work, anti-eviction work. And so what they've been doing is they coordinate with the courts and they get the list of evictions that have been filed. They go canvass those addresses, talk to the tenants, give them information about how they can fight their eviction, how they can make sure they attend their hearing to have a better outcome, hopefully, and then following up with them to see how it goes, and eventually some further work down the road. But we are going to start that here in Akron, modeled after the work that Cleveland has been doing. They have been fantastic. I've met with them a couple of times about this specific issue, and they have been great with sharing the work that they've been doing and helping teach me, and I will teach everyone else that's interested how we can be effective with that. So we are going to launch our Akron DSA housing committee officially. Our first meeting is going to be next Saturday. And so I think that we will start off with kind of some basic education about housing justice and kind of have a discussion about who will be taking the lead on different roles, because we do need to assign roles to people for this to be successful. I know everyone's busy, but you know, if we delegate and divide the work up, you know, collectively, we can do this. So Bryn dropped the links in there about what Cleveland has been doing, and then our meeting next week will of course be on Zoom. But yeah, I would love to see everyone there, and please, you know, let people know. We want to have our first canvas by mid-February is my hope, weather permitting. If it's going to be a blizzard, I mean, I am getting more adjusted to being outdoors because pandemic, I've had to get used to it. But if it's a blizzard, I don't want anybody driving. Safety comes first. So we will have to play it by ear with the weather, because February is usually kind of yucky. But that is our plan. So we have an action item, Drew. And I hope that everyone here is able to join us. And I think we can probably stop recording now if you want to, Heather.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Marie, so
Yeah,
much.
thank you. Glad to be here.
It's been wonderful.